The chandeliers glittered in the grand ballroom of the Sterling Heights Hotel in Boston, scattering light across gold-trimmed walls and polished marble floors as soft violin music mingled with the low murmur of hundreds of guests gathered to witness the wedding of Isabella Reed and Christopher Langford. In the bridal suite, Isabella, 28, stood before the mirror, adjusting the delicate laced veil draped over her chestnut brown hair, the satin gown hugging her figure, every detail of this day planned with care. She tried to smile at her reflection, pushing aside the quiet unease that had lingered in her heart all week. Her best friend and maid of honor, Olivia Hayes, whispered that she looked breathtaking, though there was a strain in her smile that Isabella chose to ignore, convincing herself it was only pre-wedding nerves as she stepped out of the room, determined to face her future. The wedding hall glowed with candlelight and white roses as guests rose to their feet while Isabella walked down the aisle, the train of her gown sweeping over the crimson carpet toward Christopher, who stood tall at the altar in a perfectly tailored suit, the son of a prominent senator and the man she had loved for 2 years. Despite lingering doubts about whether their connection was true love or simply a perfect arrangement on paper, she chose in that moment to believe in them until she saw the shift in his face. His smile vanished, his expression hardened, and in a single motion he raised his hand, halting the orchestra. The violins went silent, the room stilled, and a heavy hush fell over the crowd as he looked at her and said in a cold, steady voice, "I'm sorry, Isabella, I can't do this." Gasps echoed through the hall as Isabella froze, her mind reeling, her heart pounding in her chest. Christopher continued without emotion, "I don't want to get married, not to you. I've changed my mind," and with that, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone under the weight of hundreds of stunned, pitying eyes. Whispers broke out instantly, sharp and cutting, and camera flashes burst like lightning as voices from the crowd shouted, mocking her as a runaway bride. Phones were raised to capture her humiliation, and as Olivia rushed forward to guide her away, Isabella pulled back, her voice trembling but firm as she refused pity. With her head held high, she turned and walked to the emergency exit, the dress trailing behind her like a ghost, stepping into the stifling Boston air without looking back. She climbed into the first taxi she saw, not caring when the gown caught in the door, and told the driver to take her anywhere but there. Hours later, her heartbreak became a public spectacle as headlines blared across the news that the senator's son had abandoned his bride at the altar, while cruel stories painted her as either a pitiful victim or an ambitious woman exposed. Friends she thought she could count on vanished, some even speaking against her, and her carefully built interior design business collapsed as clients cut ties to avoid scandal. She could no longer stay in Boston, packing a small suitcase and still in her wedding gown. She boarded the midnight train heading north without a plan, desperate only to reach a place where no one knew her name. The train carried her through the night until it stopped at a quiet mountain town called Silverwood, far from the life she had known. The station was small and nearly empty, just an old platform under a crooked roof. Past midnight, there was no one in sight. She sank onto a cold wooden bench, slipping off her heels, the once pristine gown now wrinkled and dusty. Looking up at the wide dark sky scattered with stars, she searched for comfort, but the ache in her chest lingered. Hugging her arms around herself, she whispered, "What did I do wrong?" Her mother's voice echoed in her thoughts, the constant pressure to marry the right man, and a surge of defiance rose within her as she told herself she would not let this define her. Under the pale moonlight, she rose to her feet, wiped her tears, and picked up her suitcase. Boston, Christopher, and every shattered dream were behind her now, and though she didn't know what awaited her in Silverwood, she knew this was her chance to begin again. The night air in Silverwood was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine from the surrounding mountains. The small train station sat in stillness, its tin roof rattling softly in the wind. Isabella Reed stood alone on the empty platform, her suitcase at her side. The once grand wedding gown, now creased and heavy with the weight of everything she had left behind, She had no plan, no destination, only the desperate need to be anywhere. But the life she had escaped, the quiet was broken by the low purr of an engine approaching from the road. A sleek black SUV pulled to a stop in front of the station, its headlights slicing through the shadows. Isabella stiffened, her grip tightening on the suitcase handle as the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked slightly out of place in a remote mountain town. His stride was confident without arrogance, his sharp features framed by the dim glow of the street lamp. His deep-set blue eyes met hers as if he had been expecting her all along. "Isabella Reed?" he asked, his voice calm but unwavering. She frowned in surprise. "Who are you?" He stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. "Alexander Hale," he said simply. "I saw you on the news tonight. The abandoned bride from Boston." It was hard to miss. His tone carried no ridicule, no pity, just a statement of fact that made her pulse quicken. Her chest tightened with humiliation, but she masked it with coldness. "If you came to mock me, don't bother. I've had enough of that for a lifetime." He shook his head, unshaken by her sharpness. "I didn't come to mock you. I came because I think we can help each other." She tilted her head warily. "Help each other? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Alexander replied, his voice even. He pulled a phone from his jacket, scrolling quickly before holding it up to show a headline splashed with her face. "You're running away from Boston. I have a solution for you, Boot. I'll need something in return." Her eyes narrowed. "And what exactly is it you think I can give you?" "A wife," he said plainly, the word falling into the cold night air like a stone into water. Isabella's brows furrowed. "Excuse me." Alexander remained composed, his eyes locked on hers. "I need a wife. On paper only. A legal formality to settle a clause in my family's land agreement. It would be temporary 6 months. In exchange, you'd have a place to stay when no one knows you, and protection from the press." Her breath caught in disbelief. "You want me to pretend to be your wife? Just like that?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "You get a home and privacy. I get what I need to keep my ranch. 6 months, then we part ways. Clean and simple." A bitter laugh slipped from her lips. "Do I really look desperate enough to agree to marry a stranger, hours after being left at the altar?" Alexander studied her quietly for a moment, the faintest trace of a smirk tugging at his mouth. "No. You look smart enough to recognize when there's an opportunity in front of you." His tone wasn't arrogant, just certain. "You have no home to return to, Isabella. Boston isn't yours anymore. I'm offering you a way forward." She wanted to tell him to leave, to call his offer absurd, but his words rang painfully true. She had nowhere to go. Her career, her reputation, her old life, they were gone. And here in Silverwood, there was nothing but the quiet mountains. And this unexpected proposition, taking a steadying breath, she met his gaze. "If I agree, I want to see the contract, and I want my own terms." Something flickered in his eyes, approval, maybe even respect. "You're tougher than I thought." "Good. I don't like working with people who don't know what they want." He opened the SUV's passenger door, gesturing for her to get in. "We'll go over the details at my office." The drive through the sleeping town was silent except for the steady hum of the engine. They stopped at a sleek, modern building, on the edge of a wood. Inside, warm light spilled across polished floors and shelves lined with books. A large table stood in the center, and on it, a contract was already waiting. Isabella sat down, her dusty wedding gown a stark contrast against the clean lines of the office. Alexander's lawyer entered quietly and handed her the document. She read it word by word, her eyes scanning every clause. The agreement was straightforward. She would act as Alexander Hale's wife for 6 months, attend public events when required, and respect his privacy. In return, she would receive housing, financial stability, and protection from the media. But one clause made her stop. "No emotional involvement between parties," she read aloud, tapping the page. "This needs to change. I want the freedom to live my life on the ranch however I choose, as long as it doesn't interfere with my role. Alexander raised a brow, clearly surprised by her assertiveness. You want freedom? Fine. But understand, my home has rules. You'll be expected to follow them. I will, she replied, her tone steady. But I'm not your employee. I'm your partner in this arrangement. After a moment of silence, he gave a short nod. Fair enough. He revised the contract himself, printed a fresh copy, and slid it toward her with a pen. Sign it, Isabella Reed. From this moment on, you're my wife on paper. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what she was agreeing to. When she set the pen down, Alexander extended his hand. Welcome to Silverwood, Mrs. Hale. His handshake was firm, his control evident, but for the briefest moment she thought she caught a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Something deeper than the cold professionalism he wore so well. She wasn't sure what it meant. But she knew one thing: this was the first step toward rebuilding her life. The first light of morning spread softly across the mountain peaks as Alexander Hale's black SUV glided along the winding road, leading deep into Silverwood's rugged countryside. In the back seat, Isabella Reed sat quietly. No longer in her wedding gown, but in a simple sweater and jeans from her small suitcase. Still feeling like a stranger in a world that wasn't hers. The freshly signed marriage contract weighed heavily in her thoughts, reminding her that she wasn't truly Mrs. Hale, only a necessary part of an arrangement. The vehicle slowed as they approached tall iron gates that opened to reveal the Hale Ranch, a sprawling estate tucked between the foothills. The property was strikingly modern against the wild backdrop, clean lines of wood and glass forming the main house, flanked by stables, a greenhouse, and wide open fields. Everything was immaculate, yet there was an emptiness to it, a quiet that felt more like solitude than peace. When the SUV came to a stop, Isabella stepped out, the crisp mountain air filling her lungs. Alexander's voice was as steady as ever. Maria will show you to your room. Dinner is at 7. Be on time. His words were brisk, almost transactional. Before he turned to head toward his office, from the hallway emerged a petite woman in her 50s with neatly tied silk hair and a warm smile that felt like sunlight, in contrast to Alexander's cool demeanor. You must be Isabella, she said, her voice kind. I'm Maria, the housekeeper. Don't let Mr. Hale's sternness scare you. He's just not very good with people. Isabella found herself smiling for the first time in days. Maria led her upstairs to a spacious bedroom with large windows overlooking the mountains. The room was simple: just a bed, a wardrobe, and a writing desk. But everything was neat and welcoming. If you need anything, I'm always in the kitchen, Maria said warmly before leaving her to settle in. Isabella stood by the window, gazing at the ranch. The glass walls of the house reflected the sunlight, but could not hide the sense of coldness inside. As an interior designer, she couldn't help but notice how the home, despite its beauty, lacked warmth. It looked like a showroom, not a place meant to be lived in. That afternoon, she wandered through the property. A small garden lay just beyond the house, the flowers growing in disorganized clusters. In the greenhouse, plants were neatly arranged but lifelessly practical, as though tended without joy. Near the stables, she met a tall, sun-bronzed man tightening the bridle on a chestnut horse. You must be Mrs. Hale, he greeted, with a friendly grin. I'm Mark, head of security here. First time Mr. Hale's brought someone to the ranch in years. Welcome. Isabella gave a small smile, still unused to the title. Mark chatted easily, telling her how Alexander had turned this ranch from neglected land into a valuable property while keeping it isolated from the outside world. He likes his privacy, Mark said, lowering his voice slightly, but I think he's lonelier than he'd admit. That evening, exactly at 7, Isabella entered the long dining room. A polished wooden table stretched before her, set neatly, but without flourish. Alexander was already seated at the head, reviewing a file. Without looking up, Maria brought roast beef and potatoes, offering Isabella an encouraging smile before retreating. Alexander's tone was as neutral as ever when he spoke. Are you settled in? I am, she replied calmly, taking her seat. But I have a question. What exactly am I supposed to do here, besides showing up when you need me to play the role of your wife? His eyes lifted to meet hers, sharp, as if measuring her. Do whatever you want, as long as you don't interfere with me. The contract is clear. You appear when necessary. Otherwise, keep to yourself. Simple. Her fork tightened in her hand. I'm not your employee, Alexander. I agreed to be a partner in this arrangement, not a silent placeholder. If I'm here, I want purpose. For the first time, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. Purpose, he echoed, with a faint trace of skepticism. Yes, she said evenly. Your home is beautiful, but it's cold. It feels like no one really lives here. I could help change that. His eyes narrowed slightly. You think you can improve a house that doesn't belong to you? I'm an interior designer, she said firmly. I know how to make a space into a home. If you allow me, I'd like to start with the kitchen. It needs warmth. Alexander studied her for a long moment before finally setting down his file. Do what you want, just don't expect me to be involved. I don't need you to be involved, she replied with a faint smile. Just don't get in my way. Later, as she passed through the hallway, Maria pulled her aside with a knowing grin. You handled that well, she whispered. Mr. Hale isn't used to being challenged, but I saw the way he looked at you different than usual. Keep being yourself, he needs that more than he knows. Isabella returned to her room that night, standing by the window as the mountains glowed silver in the moonlight. She realized she wasn't just here to survive 6 months. She was going to leave her mark on this place and, maybe even on Alexander Hale himself. The kitchen of Hale Ranch had slowly begun to change under Isabella's touch. Soft beige curtains filtered the sunlight, a hand-woven rug added warmth underfoot, and a vase of wildflowers stood proudly on the table. For the first time since she had arrived, she felt a faint sense of peace until the hum of an engine in the distance broke the quiet. Through the window, she saw a black luxury sedan approaching the iron gates. Mark, the head of security, stepped out of the stables, his stance alert. As the gate opened, Isabella's breath caught in her chest. Christopher Langford, her ex-fiancé, stepped from the car, dressed in a navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, the same familiar arrogance etched into his smile. Beside him stood a man in a dark overcoat holding a briefcase, a lawyer. But Christopher's eyes weren't just fixed on her with disdain. There was hostility, sharp and deliberate. Maria appeared in the kitchen doorway, concern in her voice. Mrs. Hale, do you want me to call Mr. Alexander? Isabella set her teacup down with steady hands. No, Maria, I'll handle it. She smoothed the front of her sweater and walked to the door, her heels quiet on the polished floor. She had left Boston as a humiliated bride, but Silverwood had given her back her footing. She wasn't about to lose it now. At the front gate, Christopher leaned casually against his car, his smirk deepening as she approached. Isabella, he drawled. I see you ran off to marry Alexander Hale. That's disappointing. Her voice was calm, her gaze unwavering. What do you want, Christopher? I'm not part of your life anymore. The lawyer stepped forward, his tone clipped and formal. Robert Klein, representing Mr. Langford. We're here to inform you that your marriage to Mr. Hale is invalid. You are still legally bound to Mr. Langford under an engagement agreement that was never formally dissolved. We request you cease this conduct immediately, or we will pursue legal action. Isabella's eyes flashed. Invalid. You left me at the altar in front of hundreds of people. You have no claim over me. Before Klein could respond, a low, firm voice cut through the air. She doesn't belong to you, Langford, and neither does this land. Alexander Hale stepped from the house, his presence calm but his eyes like sharpened steel. He moved to stand beside Isabella, tall, steady, unyielding. And in his gaze, toward Christopher, there was more than just anger, there was history. Christopher's smirk widened with something that looked like triumph. Hale, still clinging to your precious property. I thought you'd have learned your lesson after the last time we crossed paths. Isabella glanced at Alexander, surprise flickering in her eyes. They knew each other. Alexander didn't look at her. His gaze stayed locked on Christopher. The last time you tried to steal my Colorado project, Langford, you failed. This won't be any different. Her heart quickened. Colorado, a project? Alexander had never spoken of this, but the sharp tension between the two men told her everything. This was more than a coincidence. Christopher stepped closer, his voice dripping with malice. This time is different. Isabella is my fiancée, and your little marriage won't cover up the fact that you're using her to protect your ranch. Step aside, or I'll take both of you down. The fire inside Isabella burned hotter than her fear. She stepped forward, eyes blazing. I am no longer your fiancé, Christopher. I am Alexander Hale's legal wife. She reached for Alexander's hand, squeezing it firmly, not just to prove a point, but as a declaration that she was no longer the woman he had left behind. You have no claim here. Leave. Christopher froze, stunned by her defiance. Alexander looked down at her briefly, and she saw a flash of something unexpected: respect. His fingers closed around hers, returning the pressure before turning his steely gaze back to Christopher. Your lawyer should review the paperwork again, Langford. Our marriage is legal. And if you think you can use the same tactics you tried in Colorado, you're mistaken. I beat you once, and I'll do it again. Klein shifted uneasily, muttering that he would need to review the documents. Christopher, still clinging to his arrogance, pointed a finger at Isabella. You'll regret this, Isabella. And Haley, no I don't. Stop with that. He turned. Climbing into his sedan, the car rolled away, leaving a trail of dust down the winding road. When the sound faded, Isabella realized she was still holding Alexander's hand. She released it quickly, her cheeks warming as she turned slightly away. Thank you, she said, her voice firm but quiet. And Colorado, what happened between you two? Alexander's eyes softened slightly, though his tone stayed measured. 3 years ago, the Langford family tried to undermine me in a massive real estate deal in Colorado. Christopher led the charge with bribes, legal threats, and underhanded tactics. I won, but he's never forgiven me. Now he's using you as leverage. He paused, then added in a lower voice, You handled yourself well today. I didn't expect you to stand up to him like that. Isabella gave a small, confident smile. You don't know me very well yet, Alexander. And if Christopher wants a fight, I'm not letting you stand alone. She turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Alexander standing at the gate, watching her with new curiosity. The golden light of late afternoon washed over the Hale Ranch, but the calm surface felt deceptive. Isabella stood by the living room window, her thoughts still unsettled from Christopher Langford's visit that morning. Grabbing Alexander's hand and declaring herself his wife had filled her with strength, but it also left a question lingering in her mind. In Alexander Hale's world, was she still just a contract partner, or was something quietly shifting between them? The sound of hurried footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Mark stepped into the room, his usually easygoing face tense. Mrs. Hale, can you get Alexander? I found something near the west fence footprints. Someone's been lurking near the woods. Isabella's heart tightened. She hurried to Alexander's office, knocking firmly. He opened the door, his sharp gaze locking onto Mark instantly. Mark's voice dropped to a low, grim tone. Footprints, broken branches, tire marks, not locals. Whoever it was, they avoided the cameras. Alexander's jaw tightened. Langford, he muttered, his voice like ice. He didn't stop after this morning. He's trying to sabotage the ranch. And he knows our marriage is the key to keeping the land. Isabella stepped closer, concern in her voice. Sabotage? What exactly do you mean? Alexander turned to her, his eyes dark with resolve. This land has been in my family for generations, but there's an old legal clause that requires I be married to keep ownership. Christopher and his family are trying to challenge that, and they'll stop at nothing, not even physical damage to the property. This isn't over, Isabella. Without hesitation, he turned back to Mark. We're stepping up security, and Isabella, his voice shifted, direct and protective. You need to learn how to defend yourself. If something happens, I want you ready. She straightened her shoulders, nodding even as a small chill ran through her. I'm not used to danger, but I'm not going to be the weak link. Teach me. At dusk, Alexander led her to a stretch of open land behind the stables where a makeshift shooting range was set up. A handgun rested on a wooden table, alongside a few boxes of ammunition. The setting sun cast a warm amber glow over the mountains, touching his chiseled features as he adjusted his stance. He glanced at her. Ever fired a gun? She shook her head, fingers laced tightly. Never, but I want to learn. He stepped closer, his voice calm but serious as he guided her hands. Grip it firmly, but don't tense up. Breathe steady. Aim with focus, not fear. When her stance wavered, he adjusted her posture himself, his hands firm but steady on hers. His touch was warm, different from his usual controlled demeanor. Hold it steady. But don't lock your shoulders, he said, his breath brushing near her ear. Isabella took a deep breath and aimed at the wooden target, pulling the trigger. The shot went wide, so wide she muttered under her breath in frustration. Alexander's mouth curved into a small, unexpected smile. You'll get better, but you need to believe in yourself. You're not weak, Isabella. I saw that this morning. His words lit a spark inside her. She fired again and again. The bullets edged closer to the target each time. Lowering the gun, she looked at him squarely. I don't want to be a burden, Alexander. Teach me how to protect this place. I'm here, I'll do my part. For a moment, he studied her, the steel in his eyes softening. All right, you'll learn. And I'll make sure you're safe. That night, the ranch felt different. The air was thick with quiet tension. Alexander, Mark, and Isabella took turns patrolling the property with flashlights and radios. The once serene forest felt shadowed, every rustle carrying weight. Isabella walked beside Alexander along the west fence line, the handgun now holstered at her side. Her heart pounded, but she kept her composure. They were here last night, Alexander said, crouching to examine faint tire tracks. They're scouting. We need to be ready for anything. She tightened her grip on the flashlight. You really think it's Christopher? Alexander straightened, his voice certain. I don't think. I know. He wants to destroy me, and he knows you're part of the reason he can't. But I won't let him touch you, Isabella. The protectiveness in his tone struck her unexpectedly, warming something deep inside. She glanced at him longer than she intended, but he was already scanning the dark tree line. As they continued their patrol, a sudden rustle came from the bushes. Isabella's instinct took over her hand, flew to her gun, aiming steadily, even as her fingers trembled. Alexander stepped forward, a firm hand resting gently on her shoulder. Easy, just a deer. She exhaled sharply, lowering her weapon, his hand lingering just a moment longer than necessary. By the time they returned to the house, it was late. Alexander paused at the door, his voice low but softer than she had. Ever heard it? You did good tonight. You didn't have to prove anything, but you did. Get some rest, we'll keep at it tomorrow. Isabella smiled faintly, feeling a quiet sense of pride. Thank you, Alexander, for believing in me. As she stepped inside, she felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. She wasn't just learning to protect the ranch, she was learning to protect herself. Rain fell over Hell Ranch in heavy sheets, drumming against the glass walls and turning the fields into rippling silver. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and the wind tore through the pines like a warning. From the night itself, Isabella stood in the living room, eyes fixed on the rain-slicked windows. The threat Christopher Langford had made still echoed in her mind, and the strange signs Mark had found along the fence hadn't left her thoughts. Since Alexander Hale had acted quickly, hiring a professional security team to back up Mark, who still managed the grounds, 7 trained men now patrolled the property in rotating shifts, radios crackling softly in the background. Their presence was both reassuring and unsettling, a quiet reminder that Alexander wasn't just protecting the ranch, he was preparing for war. In the kitchen, Maria busied herself making coffee, her hands moving with practiced ease but her expression clouded with worry. Mrs. Hale, you should rest. Mr. Alexander's team is excellent. No one is getting through them. Isabella shook her head. The cool metal of the handgun at her side was a constant reminder of the lessons she'd taken to heart. She wasn't confident yet, but she refused to be a bystander. Alexander entered. Rainwater glistening on his jacket, his tone firm. Stay inside tonight, Isabella. Mark and the team are on patrol. If anything happens, I'll handle it. Her chin lifted. I've learned to shoot, Alexander. I can help. I won't just watch. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before he masked it again. Stay with Maria, that's an order. He turned sharply, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't just protecting the ranch, he was protecting her. The rain deepened, thunder echoing through the valley. Maria and Isabella sat in the dimly lit living room, the beige curtains. Isabella had hung swaying softly in the draft. The silence was broken by a sudden crack loud enough to cut through the sound of the storm. A voice came through Mark's radio. Intruders at the west side, they've cut the fence. Maria's face paled. Mrs. Hale, stay here. But Isabella was already on her feet, her hand on the gun at her waist. Lock the doors, Maria, call the police. Without waiting for a reply, she slipped out the back, rain slapping her face. As the chaos grew louder, through the downpour, she saw shapes moving near the stable's masked men in black, 6 of them, at least, outnumbering Alexander's security team. Mark was fighting 2 at once, while others clashed in the mud. Alexander's voice cut through the rain, sharp and commanding. Hold the left side, don't let them near the house. Then she saw him. One of the intruders had broken free. Moving silently, toward Alexander with a glint of steel in his hand. Alexander was focused on another attacker, unaware of the danger closing in. Isabella's pulse surged. She raised her gun, her hands trembling, but her aim steady. In the flash of lightning, she exhaled and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the storm. The man cried out, dropping to the ground, clutching his leg. Alexander spun at the sound, his eyes locking onto hers in disbelief, just as another attacker raised his weapon. Without hesitation, Alexander lunged, tackling Isabella to the ground as bullets ripped through the air above them. The rain soaked them both, the world reduced to the sound of gunfire and the pounding of her heartbeat. The fight was fast and chaotic, but Alexander's team began to push back. 3 intruders were subdued. The rest vanished into the dark forest, leaving the wounded man Isabella had shot behind. Moments later, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. The police arriving just as the remaining attackers melted into the night. The ranch was left in heavy silence, broken only by the rain and the ragged breaths of those who had fought. Alexander pulled Isabella inside, his coat drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead. His hands gripped her shoulders, his eyes raw with something she had never seen before. You saved my life, he said, his voice low, unsteady in a way that made her chest tighten. But don't ever put yourself in danger like that again. I can't lose you. She was still shaking, adrenaline rushing through her, but her voice was steady. I couldn't just stand by, Alexander. This isn't just your home anymore. I'm trying to belong here, too. For a moment, there was only silence between them. His eyes softened, the walls he always held around himself cracking in the quiet. Then, without another word, he pulled her into a tight embrace. His warmth seeping through the chill of the rain. She froze for a heartbeat before relaxing against him, hearing the uneven rhythm of his heart. In that moment, she knew the lines of their arrangement had shifted forever. When they finally stepped apart, Alexander didn't let go of her hand. His gaze stayed locked on hers. You're more than a contract to me, Isabella, thank you. Her chest warmed at the words, though she didn't answer. Maria and Mark met them in the kitchen, relief in their faces. Mark grinned. Mrs. Hale. You're a fighter. Maria hugged her tightly, whispering, I knew you were special. And now Mr. Hale knows it too. That night, back in her room, Isabella stood at the window, watching the rain soften into mist. She hadn't just survived the night. She had fought back and won. The Hale Ranch no longer felt like a place of refuge. It felt like something more. The Hale Ranch greenhouse glowed under the warm shimmer of string lights. Golden bulbs hung like tiny stars, their soft light mixing with the scent of wildflowers and climbing vines that now trailed along the beams. The place, once lifeless, had transformed into a sanctuary, a quiet reflection of all the changes Isabella had brought to the ranch. At the center of the greenhouse, Isabella stood by the small fireplace, holding a small object in her hand. It was the engagement ring Christopher Langford had once slipped on her finger in Boston. She turned it slowly between her fingers, the firelight glinting off its surface. This ring had once been a symbol of her future. Now, it was nothing more than a weight she had carried too long. Alexander had arranged a dinner that evening, just the two of them, Maria and Mark. The table was set simply but beautifully. Homemade bread, grilled meat, and wine. But Isabella knew tonight was about more than a meal. She looked into the flames, her voice steady as she spoke. "I've held on to this for too long. It doesn't belong to me anymore." With a single motion, she dropped the ring into the fire. The flames caught it instantly, the metal flashing briefly before being swallowed completely. Maria clapped her hands softly, her eyes bright with pride. Mark let out a celebratory whistle. Isabella smiled faintly, feeling a strange lightness in her chest. Alexander rose from his seat, his expression unreadable at first. He set his wineglass aside and stepped toward her, his voice low but certain. "Isabella, our contract ends tonight. I don't want it anymore." She froze, her heart pounding. He took another step closer, his eyes locked on hers, his words steady. "You've changed this place. And you've changed me. I don't want terms or conditions. I want something real. No clauses, no end dates. I want to start again with you for real." Her breath caught. The air between them charged. She searched his face, seeing none of the cold, careful detachment that had defined him when they met. There was only sincerity and something deeper. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "Not because of a contract. Because of you." For the first time since she had met him, Alexander's expression softened into something unguarded, a true smile. He reached for her, his hand tilting her chin gently upward. And in the golden light of the greenhouse, surrounded by flowers and the warmth of the fire, they kissed. It was slow, certain, and filled with everything they had. Both kept buried the first kiss without barriers. Maria and Mark broke into cheers. Maria wiping her eyes while Mark grinned broadly. The tension that had once hung between Alexander and Isabella seemed to vanish with that kiss. As they stepped apart, Alexander's hand lingered at her cheek, his voice warm. "Welcome to a new life, Isabella." She smiled, feeling the truth of it in her chest. The past, the humiliation, the betrayal, the loneliness was behind her now. What lay ahead was hers to choose. Early autumn sunshine spilled across the Hale Ranch, glinting off the greenhouse glass and painting the rolling fields in gold. The air was crisp, scented faintly with pine and fresh timber. On the edge of the property, the sound of steady hammering carried through the morning. A new cabin was rising, its frame strong against the mountain backdrop. Inside the main house, Isabella Reed stood by the window, her hand resting gently on her stomach. It had only been a few days since she'd discovered the truths. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with both awe and a nervous joy. Since the night in the greenhouse when she and Alexander had decided to move forward without contracts, their lives had shifted into something real. And now, the tiny life growing inside her was proof of that new beginning. She stepped outside, following the sound of construction, until she found Alexander by the half-built cabin. His sleeves were rolled up, sawdust clinging to his shirt, sweat at his brow. Despite the team of builders available, he insisted on working himself, pouring his effort into every board, as though each piece carried meaning. "Alexander," she called softly. He looked up instantly, his expression softening when he saw her. "Is everything okay?" Isabella hesitated for just a moment, then stepped closer. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly, the words trembling in the air. "We're going to have a baby." For a heartbeat, Alexander went completely still. Then, a slow, genuine smile broke across his face. unlike any she had ever seen from him. He stepped forward, pulling her into his arms with a warmth that wrapped around her completely. "You've just made me the happiest man alive," he murmured when he stepped back. His hand moved instinctively to her stomach, his blue eyes shimmering. "We'll do this together, I promise." Tears pricked Isabella's eyes, but her voice was steady. "I'm a little scared, Alexander, but I'm happy to. I want this baby to grow up in a real family." "You both will have that," he said firmly, his voice full of quiet conviction. In the weeks that followed, the cabin began to take shape. Alexander called it a gift for you, built your way. Isabella designed every inch: the wide windows to catch the morning sun, the open living space warmed by a fireplace, and even a built-in bookcase that Alexander teased her about endlessly. "Trying to turn this into a library already," he joked one afternoon, hammering a beam into place. She laughed, tossing him a scrap of wood. "This baby's going to grow up with stories. I want this house to feel magical." He caught the scrap easily, his smile softening. "It already does, because you're in it." While the cabin rose, Isabella found a new sense of purpose. She began teaching online interior design classes for women across rural communities, wanting to help them transform their spaces, just as she had transformed the ranch. Her first sessions streamed from the main house's kitchen, where sunlight spilled across the beige curtains she'd hung months before. Women of all ages joined, from single mothers to young homeowners, listening as she shared her knowledge about color, layout, and creating warmth without expense. "A home doesn't need to be costly," she told them with a smile. "It just needs heart." When one of the women thanked her for giving them hope, Isabella felt a quiet pride she hadn't experienced in years. Teaching others was healing her, piece by piece. Alexander sometimes stood in the doorway during her sessions, saying nothing, until the class ended. Then he would step forward, placing a warm cup of tea beside her. "You were incredible," he'd say simply, pride clear in his eyes. Every evening they sat together by the fire, planning for the future, the cabin, the baby, and the life they were building. Alexander crafted a wooden cradle himself, working late into the night, his hands steady. Despite his teasing about the details, Isabella kept adding. One night, as the full moon lit the room, Isabella felt the first flutter in her belly. Her breath caught, her hand pressing gently against the sensation. Alexander noticed immediately. "Was that?" She nodded, eyes bright. "Yes, Alexander, we're going to be a family." He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her fingers. "Isabella, we already are." The small courthouse in Silverwood was quiet, but inside the air was tense. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, glinting off polished wooden benches. Isabella Reed sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her expression was calm, but beneath the surface her heart pounded. Across the aisle, Christopher Langford stood at the defendant's table. His tailored suit did little to hide the unease in his eyes. Today was more than a legal battle. It was an ending. Alexander Hale sat beside her, his posture straight, his gaze fixed firmly on Christopher. His expression was calm, but his sharp blue eyes carried the steady focus of a man who had been preparing for this moment for a long time. The case had begun with rumors. Christopher had fed to the press, claiming Alexander and Isabella's marriage was a sham, an attempt to undermine Alexander's legal claim to the ranch. But Alexander had anticipated such a move. After the attack during the stormy night, he had quietly hired a private investigation team. What they uncovered would change everything. Alexander's attorney, a sharp, confident woman named Victoria Clark, rose to address the judge. "Your Honor, we present evidence that the defendant, Christopher Langford, conspired with outside parties to sabotage the Hale Ranch in an illegal attempt to seize ownership. In addition, we have financial records showing a trail of offshore transfers consistent with money laundering." Gasps rippled softly through the courtroom as Victoria laid out forged contracts, recorded phone calls in which Christopher discussed hiring men to damage the ranch, and security footage from Alexander's property the night of the attack. Christopher tried to maintain his usual arrogant composure, but his smirk faltered as the evidence mounted, and finally, Victoria continued, "We have proof. linking Mr. Langford directly to the attempted attack on October 15th, during which the lives of Mrs. Isabella Hale and Mr. Alexander Hale were placed in immediate danger. Isabella's name echoed in the quiet room. She straightened her spine, keeping her gaze forward. She would not let Christopher see even a flicker of fear. The judge reviewed the evidence, his expression stern, before nodding. Mr. Langford will be held in detention pending full investigation. Bail is denied. Police officers moved toward Christopher, but he turned sharply, his eyes locking on Isabella. His voice was low, almost a growl. You think you've won? You're just a pawn in his game. Isabella rose slowly, walking toward him. Her voice was calm but cutting. I've forgiven myself for everything I once thought was my fault, Christopher. You don't matter to me anymore. You lost not because of Alexander, but because of your own greed. For once, Christopher had no reply. She turned away, walking back to Alexander, who stood and took her hand without hesitation. His grip was firm, grounding her as they left the courtroom together. You did well, he murmured once they stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. He can't touch us now. A faint smile curved Isabella's lips. He never will again. That evening, the Hale Ranch glowed under the gentle light of the moon. Isabella sat in the living room she had transformed, beige curtains framing the windows, wildflowers brightening the table. Maria brought a tray of tea, while Mark tried to lighten the mood with a few jokes. But Isabella's gaze kept finding Alexander sitting quietly beside her. He rose, taking her hand. Come outside. On the porch, the mountains stretched endlessly beneath the silver sky. Alexander turned toward her, his voice low but steady. I've been preparing for this day for years. I knew Langford wouldn't stop after Colorado, but I didn't expect you to be the one to bring him down. You didn't just protect this ranch, you protected us. Isabella's heart tightened. I didn't do it alone. Alexander gave me a place to stand again. This isn't just your home anymore, it's ours. He smiled faintly, resting his hand gently on her growing belly. And it will be our child's home too. For the first time in years, Isabella felt the shadows of her past fade completely into the distance. The Hale Ranch greenhouse shimmered like a dream under the late spring sunlight. Rows of white roses climbed the glass walls, their petals opening to the warm afternoon air. Soft string lights hung overhead, glowing faintly even in daylight, as if the place itself remembered the night when Alexander and Isabella first shared their kiss here today. It was no longer a contract. No more pretending. It was real. Isabella Reed stood near the greenhouse entrance, her fingers brushing over the lace of her wedding gown. It was simpler than the dress she had worn in Boston, yet far more beautiful to her. Delicate floral embroidery tracing along the skirt, the fabric light and soft. Her chestnut hair was styled in loose curls that fell over her shoulders, and her veil caught the sunlight as if holding pieces of the sky. Through the glass walls, she could see the guests gathered, friends from Silverwood, a few trusted neighbors, and people who had become part of their lives. Mark stood by the aisle in a well-tailored suit, his usual grin wide and unrestrained. Maria was near the front, wiping her eyes even before the ceremony began. A figure appeared at the doorway behind Isabella. It was her father. His eyes softened when he saw her. I wasn't sure you'd want me here, he said quietly. She turned to him, her voice gentle. I wasn't sure either, but I want a new beginning for all of us. His shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in years, she saw warmth in his expression. Then let me walk you to him, he said. The music began, soft notes that echoed through the greenhouse as Isabella stepped forward, her father at her side. Guests rose to their feet, and sunlight streamed through the glass, bathing everything. In a golden glow dot at the end of the aisle stood Alexander Hale, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his blue eyes fixed solely on her. There was no trace of the guarded man she had met months ago. His expression was open, his smile warm, and in his gaze was the steady certainty of a man who had chosen her completely. When she reached him, Alexander extended his hand. As their fingers met, it felt like every moment their deal, the storm, the battles, the quiet nights had led them here. The officiant's voice was calm, but neither of them looked away from each other. When it was time for vows, Alexander's voice was steady, filled with meaning. Isabella, you came into my life when I least expected it. What began as a contract became the most real thing I have ever known. You brought life back to this home and to me. I promise you for the rest of our lives, you will never stand alone. Her throat tightened, tears threatening, as she began her vows. Alexander, you gave me a place to feel safe when I had nowhere else to go. But you gave me so much more. You gave me a reason to believe again. I don't promise a perfect life, but I promise to build it with you every single day. The officiant smiled softly. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Alexander didn't wait for permission. He leaned forward, kissing her with a tenderness that made the guests erupt into applause. Maria's tears streamed freely, and even Mark clapped loudly, his grin stretching from ear to ear. As they turned toward the aisle, Isabella caught sight of the cabin in the distance, the home they had built together waiting for them. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, where the future was already beginning to grow. They stepped outside, the warm silverwood air wrapping around them, petals drifting from the flowers above as friends and neighbors cheered. Alexander glanced down at her, his voice quiet so only she could hear. Ready to go home, Mrs. Hale? She smiled, her heart full. I already am home. And with that, hand in hand, they walked forward into the life they had built together. Future born from an arrangement, transformed by love, and sealed by the vows spoken in the place that had become there forever.